So, you want to buy an airport. It sounds like the absolute holy grail of capitalism, doesn't it? You buy a massive plot of land, pour some concrete, build a runway, and just sit back while multi-million-dollar metal birds land on your tarmac. It is, by every reasonable stretch of the imagination, the closest thing the modern economic world has to a literal toll booth. Think about the beautiful simplicity of this business model. You have exactly one road in, one road out, and every single living soul who dares to use it has no choice but to hand you their hard-earned cash. There is absolutely zero competition. Nobody in their right mind is going to build a rival international airport right next to yours. You are, by definition, the only game in town. It is the ultimate capitalist dream. But Wall Street loves a good illusion, and the chasm between this beautiful dream and the brutal reality of the aviation infrastructure business is wide enough to swallow a Boeing 777 whole. The real problem isn't the revenue. It's what happens between the dream and the actual balance sheet. It's the eye-watering cost of entry. It's the astronomical cash burn required just to keep the lights on and the security lines moving. And worse, what happens to your beautiful monopoly when the entire world suddenly stops flying? We are talking about why the smartest, most sophisticated infrastructure investors on the planet, institutional titans with hundreds of billions of dollars to deploy, still manage to lose spectacular, historic amounts of money on airports that, by every standard spreadsheet metric, should have been absolute cash cows. To understand how we got here, we have to look at who is actually selling these massive pieces of infrastructure. For the vast majority of modern aviation history, airports were strictly the domain of sovereign governments, public infrastructure built by local taxpayers, and run like slow-moving bureaucratic utilities. But in the 1980s, a massive ideological shift occurred. Cash-strapped governments suddenly realized they were sitting on enormously valuable, highly monetizable real estate assets. At the exact same time, private equity funds and institutional investors woke up to the fact that a regulated monopoly with guaranteed, structural passenger traffic was exactly the kind of yield-generating asset you want to lock into your portfolio for the next 50 years. What followed was a massive, sweeping wave of privatization across more than 90 countries. Today, more than 850 airports worldwide feature some form of private investment. If you look at Europe, a staggering 76% of all passenger traffic moves through privately owned or operated airports. In Latin America, that number hits 78%. But then you look at the United States, and the entire economic thesis turns completely on its head. American commercial aviation infrastructure is almost entirely the opposite. Iconic global gateways like JFK, LAX, Chicago O'Hare, and Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson are strictly owned by city and state governments. In fact, the only major commercial airport fully privatized under the federal program is Luis Muñoz Marin International in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Why? Because American airports have access to a financial superpower that private buyers can only dream of, massive pools of tax-exempt municipal bonds that drive funding costs down to levels a private consortium simply cannot compete with. When governments do decide to cash out, they pull one of three levers: an outright sale, a public stock offering, or the highly popular long-term concession model, where a private buyer takes operational control for anywhere from 40 to 99 years before handing the keys back to the state. And when the big boys play in this space, the numbers defy gravity. Back in 2002, the Australian government leased Sydney Airport under a 99-year concession. Fast forward 20 years to a world paralyzed by a global pandemic, and a consortium of Australian superannuation funds swooped in to acquire full control for approximately 32 billion Australian dollars. It stands as the single largest infrastructure takeover in Australian history. Now, why would anyone drop $32 billion on a single airport when international travel had completely collapsed? Because institutional infrastructure investors don't value airports the way day traders value tech stocks. They benchmark the purchase price against EBITDA earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. In a normal, healthy economic environment, a premium airport trades at a multiple of 15 to 23 times its annual EBITDA. But the buyers of Sydney Airport weren't pricing the asset based on the ghost town earnings of 2022. They were buying a permanent geographic monopoly in a primary global city for the next several decades. You are not buying temporary cash flow. You are buying the physical gatekeeper of global trade for as long as human beings fly through the upper atmosphere. But what if you can't buy an existing gateway? What if you want to build a brand new airport from scratch? Welcome to the greenfield construction nightmare. The very first thing you need is a truly absurd amount of flat, legally cleared land. A modern international hub requires anywhere between 20 to 55 square miles of real estate. To put that into perspective, Denver International Airport sprawls across a jaw-dropping 53 square miles, an acreage that is physically larger than the entire landmass of the city of San Francisco. Long before you even think about pouring a single short ton of concrete, just acquiring that massive footprint, clearing land titles, legally compensating thousands of displaced residents, and navigating strict environmental protection zones will easily burn through hundreds of millions of dollars of your initial capital. Then come the runways. Let's clear up a common misconception. An aviation runway is absolutely not a glorified highway. It is a massive, hyper-engineered, multi-layered structural slab specifically designed to absorb the violent, repeated kinetic impact of a 400-ton commercial aircraft slamming onto the ground at high speeds, tens of thousands of times every single year for over a century. In the developed world, building a single modern commercial runway costs well over $1 billion. When London Heathrow proposed adding its highly controversial third runway, the estimated capex exploded to between $13 and $18 billion for just one single strip of concrete at an already existing operational site. To understand how crazy this capital escalation is, look at Gatwick Airport. The entire airport was sold in 2009 for £1.5 billion British pounds. A mere decade later, Gatwick's proposed new runway project alone was estimated to cost between 10 to 13 billion pounds, roughly 8 times what the entire operational airport was bought for just 10 years prior. And then you have the passenger terminals. Except these aren't just buildings, they are fully autonomous, high-security mini-cities. You have to design and maintain miles of underground baggage conveyor networks that process thousands of pieces of luggage every hour without fail. You need industrial HVAC systems capable of air conditioning millions of cubic feet of open terminal space per hour. You need advanced security lanes built to meet strict government explosive detection standards, automated jet bridges calibrated to match dozens of different commercial aircraft door heights, and complete redundant backup power grids for every single mission-critical system. All of it must run simultaneously, flawlessly, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. That is why Beijing Daxing International Airport carries a price tag of roughly $17 billion, and the first phase alone of Istanbul's new mega hub cleared $12 billion. And even after you cut those massive checks, you are still staring down 3 to 5 years of bureaucratic red tape, environmental assessments, and endless legal challenges from local communities before the first commercial flight ever gets clearance to land. This brings us directly to the financial trap that destroys large-scale airport infrastructure projects more reliably than almost anything else on Earth: the brutal physics of capitalized interest. When you borrow billions of dollars to construct a mega airport, and trust me, private consortia always leverage these projects with massive amounts of debt. The investment bankers do not care if your project is delayed. You start paying interest the exact day the loan proceeds hit your bank account, not the day your beautiful ribbon-cutting ceremony happens. Every single month of construction delay is a month where you are paying tens of millions of dollars in non-revenue-generating interest expenses on billions of dollars of idle debt. Look no further than the historic debacle of Berlin-Brandenburg Airport in Germany. The project was originally scheduled to open its gates to the flying public in October of 2011. It finally, painfully opened in October of 2020, a catastrophic 9 years behind schedule. The initial projected budget was roughly €2 billion. The final economic toll topped a staggering €7 billion, more than 3 times the original estimate. And to add insult to catastrophic injury, it finally opened in the absolute teeth of a global pandemic when air travel demand had completely disintegrated. The project's chief expert advisor openly admitted that it was mathematically impossible for the airport to ever escape the red, calling it a permanent cash shredding machine that would require taxpayer bailouts indefinitely. What caused a legendary Western European engineering hub to stall for nearly a decade? It wasn't a shortage of high-grade construction materials, labor strikes, or unexpected weather events. It was the fire safety smoke extraction system. The automated system designed to pull smoke out of the terminal in an emergency had been poorly integrated into the complex architecture far too late in the game. Every single time engineers ran a test, it completely failed regulatory standards. Every time regulators flagged a structural flaw, construction ground to a halt, prompting massive, expensive redesigns. Then, the municipal fire safety codes changed mid-construction, triggering yet another comprehensive redesign cycle. Thousands of miles of high-voltage cables had been laid down without proper engineering documentation, making inspections completely impossible without ripping out miles of finished interior walls. Thang cuốn bị tính toán sai kích thước cơ học, hệ thống cửa tự động hoạt động sai lệch, và cấu trúc mái che liên tục bị rò rỉ nước. None of these flaws were individually fatal, but, collectively, they burned a €5 billion hole in the balance sheet and wasted 9 years of economic productivity. Across the Atlantic, Denver International Airport walked into the exact same trap in the 1990s. The airport opened 16 months late, almost entirely because its highly ambitious, $200 million automated baggage handling system kept structurally chewing up and destroying passenger luggage during testing. The total cost of the airport swelled to $4.8 billion. During those 16 months of forced closure, the compounding interest expenses and baseline operational maintenance costs burned through an estimated $1.1 million per day. Every single morning the sun rose over that empty terminal, Denver lost over $1 million just keeping the ghosts warm. If you manage to survive the construction gauntlet and actually open the gates, your financial survival depends on 2 completely distinct revenue streams. The first is what the industry calls aeronautical revenue. These are the baseline operational fees you levy directly on commercial airlines for the privilege of touching your infrastructure. We're talking about landing fees, calculated strictly on the maximum takeoff weight of the aircraft, passenger departure charges, and hourly fees for parking a jet on the operational apron. At London Heathrow, an airline has to hand over roughly $9,000 every single time a massive wide-body aircraft touches down on the runway. On top of that, every single passenger departing through the gates generates an additional fee of approximately $55 for the airport's top line. That sounds like an absolute license to print money, right? Well, here is the catch. Because airports are structural, geographic monopolies, governments in almost every civilized jurisdiction impose incredibly strict regulatory caps on exactly how much you can squeeze the airlines. If an airline wants to fly its passengers to London, they have to use Heathrow. There is no magic alternative. To prevent airports from engaging in predatory pricing, sovereign regulators hold the line. In the United Kingdom, the Civil Aviation Authority conducts a grueling, comprehensive economic review every 5 years to set a hard regulatory ceiling on the maximum charge per passenger. For the current regulatory cycle spanning 2022 through 2026, the CAA aggressively slashed Heathrow's allowed passenger charge down to £21.03, a brutal, near 20% reduction from the previous period. Heathrow immediately launched furious legal appeals, screaming that the new cap was too low to sustain critical capital investments, while the regulator bluntly countered that the airport's profits were already more than healthy. This is the structural paradox of aeronautical revenue. The state dictates your margins, and their answer is always going to be less than what your private equity investors want. Because your primary engine is locked inside a tight regulatory cage, every single major privatized airport on the planet has spent the last 3 decades aggressively building a secondary, hyper-profitable shadow business inside the terminal walls. A business that sovereign regulators have absolutely no legal right to cap, that scales significantly faster than baseline passenger volume, and that prints profit margins that commercial airlines can only dream of. Welcome to the world of non-aeronautical revenue. Globally, this unregulated goldmine accounts for roughly 37% of total airport income, and in premium European and Asian hubs, it routinely clears the 40% mark. And if you want to know what the absolute apex predator of non-aeronautical revenue looks like, look no further than the suburban concrete parking structures of the United States. In the American market, parking and ground transportation drive a staggering 46% of all commercial revenue. In the 2024 fiscal year alone, Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport generated a mind-blowing $251 million from parking fees alone. Los Angeles International pulled in approximately $181 million just for letting cars sit on concrete. Why is this business so absurdly lucrative? Because the airport owns a complete, absolute geographic monopoly on the square mileage surrounding the terminal. Premium covered parking at major US hubs routinely pushes past $100 per day, and unlike the strict landing fees on the runway, there is absolutely no government regulator watching the parking meter. Beyond the parking lots, the terminal retail model is built on an incredibly calculated corporate structure known as the Minimum Annual Guarantee, or MAG. When a high-end luxury perfume brand or a premium restaurant wants to secure a storefront inside a crowded terminal, they don't just sign a standard commercial lease. They enter a high-stakes contract committing to pay the airport either a fixed, hefty percentage of their gross sales, typically tracking between 16% and 20%, or a massive, predetermined flat annual fee, whichever number happens to be higher. This is the ultimate hedge for the airport's balance sheet. If the economy takes a hit and retail sales slow down, the airport's downside is completely protected by the contract's baseline minimum guarantee. But if international travel booms and the duty-free store prints money, the airport instantly captures its raw percentage of every single transaction. The physical architecture of a modern terminal is explicitly, systematically designed to force passengers directly into the path of these high-margin retail stores. The entire layout is a highly sophisticated exercise in consumer behavioral psychology. Think about the physical journey. You go through the high-stress gauntlet of the government security checkpoint, easily the most anxiety-inducing moment of the modern travel experience. The moment you clear the metal detectors, airport architects intentionally deposit you directly into what the industry calls the recomposure zone. Suddenly, the structural design completely changes. The ceilings become noticeably lower, the harsh fluorescent lighting softens into warm tones, and the corridors widen significantly. This is a deliberate psychological trick designed to signal to your nervous system that the stressful part of the journey is officially over, and it is now safe to drop your guard, relax, and lower your cognitive defenses. And in the calculated world of airport economics, the word relax is a direct euphemism for spending money. In many of the world's leading mega hubs, there is physically no direct linear path from the security checkpoint to the departure gates. Designers implement a forced walk-through retail layout, obligating every single passenger to snake their way directly through the center of the duty-free shopping floor. Empirical retail studies show that this forced serpentine layout increases gross retail sales by up to a massive 60% compared to traditional airport designs, where the shops are neatly tucked away off to the side. And the psychological manipulation goes even deeper. Because the vast majority of the human population is structurally right-handed, people naturally pull their rolling luggage with their right hand, which unconsciously causes their body to drift slightly to the left, while their eyes naturally scan toward the right. Knowing this precise biometric quirk, architects deliberately designed primary terminal walkways to curve gently to the left, ensuring that as you walk toward your gate, your eyes are continuously, effortlessly locked onto the ultra-high margin luxury merchandise showcased on the right side of the glass. All of this non-aeronautical money looks absolutely brilliant on a corporate pitch deck, but the reason investing in an airport is never a guaranteed fortune comes down to the staggering scale of the operational cost creep. Let's start with security infrastructure. Every single passenger and checked bag must be continuously vetted using cutting-edge three-dimensional X-ray machines, advanced body scanners, and explosive trace detection technology. The moment sovereign governments upgrade their national security mandates, you have no choice but to immediately buy the new equipment. There is absolutely no room for commercial negotiation. Today, roughly 41% of all airport operators worldwide report experiencing intense, systemic financial pressure, driven solely by these legally mandated security technology upgrades. Deep beneath the passenger floor lies the baggage handling system, miles of heavy conveyor belts and automated sorting machinery that continuously devour massive amounts of electrical power and require an army of highly specialized, round-the-clock engineering teams. If that system goes down for even an hour, your entire hub grinds to a catastrophic halt. The utility bills alone are staggering. A major international terminal possesses more physical floor space than multiple city blocks of prime downtown real estate, and it has to stay fully illuminated and powered 24 hours a day, every single day of the year. Your emergency backup generators must be fully fueled, and your aircraft rescue and firefighting crews must be fully staffed at 3 a.m., even if the only aircraft landing is a single delayed cargo flight. And if you operate in northern latitudes, you have to maintain a multi-million-dollar fleet of specialized snowplows, sweepers, and chemical de-icers on high alert. If your runway closes for just 2 hours due to a blizzard, it destroys both your immediate revenue and your long-term reputation. Here is the structural trap. None of these massive operational expenses fluctuate based on how busy your terminal is. It makes absolutely zero difference to your baseline cost structure, whether 20 million high-spending passengers walk through your doors or just 10 million. The lights must stay on, the security lines must remain open, and the runways must be plowed. Your costs are completely fixed, but your revenue is wildly variable. In early 2020, the absolute ultimate nightmare scenario hit the global aviation sector. By April of that year, a staggering 66% of the entire global commercial fleet was permanently grounded. Total industry passenger revenues cratered by a historic $418 billion, a catastrophic 69% freefall compared to the year before. For airport owners, this was a financial apocalypse. The runways didn't close. The massive bond interest payments still came due every single month. Insurance premiums remained locked in, and the utility bills kept arriving. Airports went from printing hundreds of millions of dollars to generating practically zero revenue overnight, while their fixed cost base remained completely intact. The retail tenants who had signed those ironclad minimum annual guarantee contracts simply could not pay. Enforcing the MAG clauses would have instantly driven every shop in the terminal into liquidation, leaving the airport with a graveyard of empty storefronts for years to come. The smarter operators threw the contracts out the window, temporarily shifting their tenants to a pure percentage of sales model just to keep the retail ecosystem alive. The ones who survived the absolute worst of the bleeding did something no one foresaw. They aggressively ripped out passenger seats and converted their empty terminals and idled aircraft cabins into emergency international cargo hubs to capture the desperate global demand for time-sensitive electronics, pharmaceutical shipping. If you drop below the threshold of 1 million passengers per year, an airport almost always bleeds cash. There simply isn't enough raw foot traffic to generate the scale of retail spending and parking revenue required to offset the baseline cost of keeping a massive infrastructure complex alive 24 hours a day. The only reason these small regional facilities survive is because governments willingly subsidize their structural losses for political reasons, regional connectivity, or local economic development. But if a small airport tries to run as a purely commercial enterprise without state backing, they walk straight into the arms of ultra-budget carriers like Europe's Ryanair. Budget giants have built an incredibly predatory business model, specifically engineered to exploit this structural dependency. They roll up to a struggling regional hub with a harsh proposition. They will bring the passenger traffic, but in exchange, the airport must slash its landing fees by 50% and pay massive, multi-million-dollar marketing subsidies, conveniently labeled as tourism promotion contributions, directly back to the airline. The airport has its back completely against the wall. If they refuse, the airline walks, the terminal instantly empties out, and the asset becomes entirely worthless. This brings us to the absolute most embarrassing, expensive, and catastrophic failure mode in the entire infrastructure asset class, the phenomenon of the ghost airport. These are mega facilities that were fully financed, constructed, and opened, only to realize that the long-term passenger demand projections were not just slightly off, they were catastrophically fictional. The undisputed poster child for this infrastructure hubris is Ciudad Real Central Airport in Spain. Built during the height of the mid-2000s speculative construction boom, the facility was hubristically designed to serve as a massive alternative gateway to Madrid-Barajas. The developers spared absolutely no expense, constructing one of the longest commercial runways in all of Europe at a massive 13,400 feet, a state-of-the-art terminal capable of processing 10 million passengers per year, and comprehensive plans for a direct high-speed rail link. The investment thesis was that Madrid was running out of capacity, and that an alternative hub located 125 miles to the south would easily capture the corporate overflow. The airport officially opened its gates in 2008. Within 2 short years, the entire operating company filed for bankruptcy. By 2012, the multi-billion-dollar facility was permanently closed. The developers made a fundamental, catastrophic error. They completely forgot to ask the commercial airlines if they actually wanted to fly there. As it turned out, global carriers had zero interest in landing their jets 125 miles away from the primary market just to service a minor regional town of 75,000 residents. A billion-euro engineering marvel was left to rot in the Spanish sun with absolutely no economic purpose. When the asset was put up for a bankruptcy liquidation auction, a speculative Chinese investment firm submitted an insultingly low bid of just 10,000 euros. The bankruptcy court instantly rejected it. After years of failed negotiations, the entire complex was finally sold off in 2018 for a mere 56 million euros, roughly 5% of its original construction cost. Today, it operates as a quiet boneyard and storage facility for retired commercial aircraft. In Sri Lanka, Matala Rajapaksa International Airport stands as an even starker monument to political hubris. Financed via massive loans from China's Export-Import Bank, the $209 million facility was built in a remote, low-population region and designed to comfortably process 1 million international travelers annually. Today, it welcomes an average of roughly 12 passengers per single day. Meanwhile, the sovereign government is legally on the hook for approximately $23.6 million every single year just to service the debt on the Chinese loans used to construct it. The facility is so completely starved of aviation traffic that the government has resorted to renting out its state-of-the-art cargo terminals just to store excess bags of rice. In both cases, the fatal flaw was identical. The projects were driven entirely by the vanity of political ambition rather than cold, hard route planning data. Airlines are in the business of flying people where they actually want to go, and if the airlines refuse to show up, your multi-million-dollar terminal is nothing more than a glorified rice barn. Now let's look at the complete opposite end of the financial spectrum. What happens when an airport gets absolutely everything right? Look at Spain's legendary Aena Group. They operate a massive network of 46 domestic airports across Spain, alongside premium international assets in Brazil and the United Kingdom. In the 2024 fiscal year, ANA reported a staggering consolidated revenue of €5.8 billion. But look at their operating profit. Their EBITDA clocked in at a jaw-dropping €3.5 billion. That represents an operating margin of a mind-boggling 60%. To put that into perspective, in the vast majority of global corporate industries, a 10% operating margin is considered perfectly healthy. An airport network operating at a 60% EBITDA margin is extracting an extraordinary, almost predatory amount of economic value from every single human being who steps foot inside their perimeter. In 2024, ANA's commercial non-aeronautical revenue grew by a massive 14.7%, completely outpacing the growth rate of their actual passenger volume. The company processed a staggering 369.5 million passengers across its footprint, roughly 1 million travelers every single day. When you operate at that mind-boggling scale, a simple €1 increase in the average retail or commercial spending per passenger across the Spanish network automatically prints an extra €300 million of pure profit straight onto the bottom line every single year. Germany's Fraport Group, the operator of Frankfurt Airport, tells a very similar story of structural dominance. Frankfurt stands as one of the single busiest air cargo hubs on the European continent and one of the most vital, irreplaceable connecting hubs in global aviation history. International airlines cannot choose to bypass Frankfurt, not because there are no other runways in Europe, but because such a massive structural percentage of their high-margin connecting passengers explicitly expect Frankfurt as their transfer node, that removing it from the schedule would instantly destroy the airline's passenger load factors across their entire global network. That is the ultimate competitive moat that separates a mega hub from a struggling regional airport. The small airport is entirely at the mercy of the airlines. The mega hub is a vital geographic destination that global airlines simply cannot afford to ignore. Looking ahead into the coming decades, the entire economic landscape of airport ownership is undergoing a profound structural evolution. The most significant shift is the rise of what urban planners call the aerotropolis model. In the traditional 20th century aviation model, you built an airport far outside the city limits and then built highways to connect it. In the aerotropolis future, the city is intentionally built concentrically around the airport terminal. We are talking about premium logistics parks, corporate cold storage facilities, hotel districts, advanced research laboratories, and massive manufacturing zones growing directly outward from the runway perimeter. The macroeconomic logic is completely bulletproof. Every single minute a high-value shipment of advanced electronics or life-saving pharmaceuticals spends sitting in urban traffic gridlock, it loses structural economic value. Global corporations that move time-sensitive goods want to be physically positioned right next to the cargo holds. Smart airport operators leverage this by aggressively selling or leasing the surrounding real estate at premium corporate rates, generating massive, ultra-stable streams of long-term commercial lease income that have absolutely nothing to do with how many passengers checked into the terminal on any given morning. Inside the terminal walls, the future of maximizing retail revenue is all about systematically eliminating operational friction. The single most expensive part of the modern airport experience in terms of lost commercial cash flow is the security queue. Every single minute a passenger spends stuck standing in a slow-moving security line is a minute where they are emotionally stressed, mentally fatigued, and physically incapable of spending money at your retail stores. To combat this, mega hubs are aggressively deploying hundreds of millions of dollars into advanced biometric facial recognition systems. The goal is to seamlessly match your face to your digital passport and boarding pass simultaneously as you naturally walk through an open gate. No lines, no stopping, no friction. The corporate objective is to make international aviation security look as completely invisible and effortless as swiping a transit card into a subway station. The faster you clear the gauntlet, the faster you enter the recomposure zone, the more time you spend on the retail floor, and the more cash you drop per passenger. That is the entire economic playbook wrapped up in one single operational strategy. So, what is the final economic verdict on buying an airport? The honest answer is that it depends entirely on the brutal physics of scale. A small regional facility processing fewer than 1 million travelers per year is an absolute financial money pit that will almost certainly bleed cash indefinitely, existing purely on the life support of government subsidies or airline extortion. But once you cross into a mid-sized hub handling between 15 and 25 million passengers annually, the economics become genuinely beautiful. Your high-margin non-aeronautical revenue easily outpaces your baseline operational expenses. Your minimum annual guarantee retail contracts become immensely valuable, and your parking assets essentially turn into hands-free cash printing machines. And if you manage to control a premier mega hub processing over 40 million flyers, you are sitting on one of the most extraordinarily profitable, heavily moated infrastructure assets in human history. Across the global aviation sector, the average net profit margin for airports hovers around a modest-looking 16%, but that modest percentage completely masks the absolute jaw-dropping scale of the total revenues involved. When you operate at this level, you aren't just buying a standard commercial business. You are buying a highly predatory, structurally unassailable piece of physical infrastructure that legally forces every commercial airline in your region to hand you a check, forces every global traveler to pass directly through your highly calculated retail gauntlet, and forces every driver to drop a fortune just to park their car on your concrete. In the right global city, at the right operational scale, and with the right corporate management, it is one of the most durable, cash-printing monopolies in the history of global business. The only question you have to ask yourself is whether your balance sheet can survive the cash-devouring gauntlet long enough to actually reach it. VE